And we are ready for our second talk. So what I want to do next is bring up our second speaker, and that's going to be Chris. And Chris is going to tell you about why RWAs are going to go to zero. So without further ado, please welcome Chris.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me? Good, good, good. All right. So let's rip through this today and talk a little about RWAs. Talk is why RWAs are going to zero. And maybe really quick on ourselves and who I am. I run a project called Plume. We're the largest RWA chain and the biggest RWA ecosystem out here. But we can talk a bit about why it's going the wrong way, and we'll figure this out soon. Maybe really quickly on us. This is just a bit of background on our team and everything. So, I'm Chris. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Plume. We've got about 30 people today across a bunch of these places. Great folks from, great crypto businesses like Coinbase and DYDX, Binance, Galaxy, and those things. And secondarily, then, we also recently raised, or not recently, a couple months ago, we raised $10 million for our round from great folks like Han Ventures, Galaxy, Cartier Capital, and a bunch of folks like that. So we've been really, happy and fortunate to get to this place. Now, maybe let's jump forward. So, the fact that we're running an RWA product, an RWA chain, and also saying that RWAs are going to zero is always the contentious point here, and we'll get to what that means in a second. But maybe before we get to it, I thought it'd be worth to define and worth to start talking a little bit about what are RWAs, right? I'm sure some people have heard it, some people have not, but maybe let's just get on the same page. RWAs, right, there's a Chainlink report that came out somewhat recently that just said, look, RWAs are just, tokens that represent physical and traditional financial assets, things like currencies, bonds, equities, and things like that, right? And what this really means is if you look at two types of assets, one are crypto-native assets, right? Things like ETH, BTC, SOL, whatever it might be, things that are born and live natively on the blockchain. And number two, you have RWAs, right? RWAs are things that have a tie to the real world in some sense, right? Maybe they're backed by something, maybe it's equity, maybe it's watches, wine, whatever it is, right? That's what the start of this is and what RWAs are, right? And, the thing that's been sort of exciting about RWAs in the last year is we've seen a ton of growth in this market, in this area, right? RWAs currently are about $13 billion in market cap, right? And we've seen, after basically zero activity for a long time, it began to pick up. And this is the result of two things. One was on the macro side of things, you had a big change this year, right? We can see the mark on here, the BTC ETF came out, right? So the BTC ETF and the ETH ETF means that institutions are now allowed to sell these products to their clients and be able to sell things. And if we know anything about institutions, they want to sell new things to their clients, right? And so they have a new thing in their bag to go sell to people, and that means it's a new opportunity for them. So it allows more money to come in and more stable and consistent money to stay into these assets. So that's what was exciting. But even back before that, there was a unique moment in time about 2 years ago. The sort of RWA stuff happened then, which is 2 years ago, there was a unique moment where the off-chain assets and off-chain yields for the first time printed better than on-chain yields, right? So you had a 5% treasury that did better than 2% on compounded AVE by lending it out. And what that led to was an enormous amount of sucking of these assets on chains. You see treasuries getting put into different products. You have even things like DAI that are backed by treasuries now. So a lot of protocols are using real yields and real things on chain to pass those yields back to users, right? And that's what's led to a lot of this excitement and a lot of the growth here, right? And so you can see, even in tokens, when it comes to RWAs, right, that, excluding meme coins, looking across the entire landscape, this is just Q1. Actually, for the rest of the year, it's actually much more stark. RWAs are by far the number one performing token and the number one performing asset in the market, right? And we've really seen that it's grown. There's a lot of excitement and there's a lot of hype around it, and it's really driven off a bunch of these things. This is the core story as to why people are excited about it, right? Because when you look at crypto today, crypto is a $2-3 trillion asset class, give or take, depending on where things are, right? And if you look at every single one of these things outside of it, derivatives, real estate, equities, whatever it might be, every single one of these things where the world's money is actually tied up, where users are actually tied up, where there's networks, use cases, all things around it, all of these things are several orders of magnitude larger than all of crypto today. And so the idea is very simple. If we can take some of those things, put them on chain, in theory, we'll all be rich, right? That's what everyone thinks is going on. That's why everyone thinks RWAs are exciting, right? That's the truth of it. Now, the truth also is, like, if you look at this, the headlines will tell you something similar as well, right? We're going to look around. There's been a lot of news and a lot of noise around tokenization RWAs in the last year or so, right? Especially in the last 6 months, right? So you see things, for example, number one, probably the largest thing here is BlackRock, right? BlackRock and Larry Fink, right? $10 trillion asset manager said they're deploying a bunch of things on chain. They're taking, the first thing as they did was, and more importantly, they're doing things on public blockchains, right? So they deployed their fund, BUIDL, which is a money market fund, on ETH mainnet, right? Which is a huge first step and one of the first institutions to do things on public blockchains. You have have things like Franklin Templeton deploying a $300 million fund called Benji, their own money market fund, on a bunch of different EVM chains, right? And then even recently, you have things like Visa announcing a tokenization platform. You have State Street giving out a credit card so you can then spend against your money. That's on-chain as well, right? So you have all these things happening where the institutions, in theory, are beginning to come things on-chain and beginning to bring a bunch of the stuff that they have in their reserves on-chain. And again, the idea is very simple. If we can take some of these assets, put them on-chain, it will grow the entire value of crypto, right, from 2 trillion to 3 trillion to 4 trillion, right? And the size, as we saw, is massive, right? BlackRock alone is a $10 trillion asset manager, right? So BlackRock, a single company, is worth 5 of everything in crypto today, right? So if we just take a fraction of this and put to crypto, it should grow. It's as simple as that, right? Now, I asked a friend somewhat recently what they thought was exciting in RWAs, and we're talking, and that's how late Miles was talking about RWAs, and like he was asking me what was going on and what was actually exciting about this and what was happening, and he pointed me to this, which is there's a recent headline from the DMV saying that they're tokenizing a bunch of car titles, right? And so on Avalanche, right? And so AVAX apparently, in theory, is getting 42 million car titles onto a subnet somewhere, right? And that's cool. And it makes sense, and it sounds interesting, and it sounds great because you have things like 42 million titles, right? You have words like Avalanche, you have words like subnets, you have things like, oh, we're doing a real thing and putting it on chain, it's a real use case, right? Now, unfortunate truth, though, is the reality is actually if you dial a little bit back, you can actually search for the article, the contents of that article, and go back in time and find this exact same thing almost 2 years ago, which is they announced the exact same nonsense, but on Tezos, right? Right, and so it's very classic, you know, the institutions are coming, right, and they're gonna save us, and it turns out it's bullshit, right? And that's what this really comes down to, right? The exact same story happened 2 years ago, right, and people think it's a thing. And so it goes back to the same idea. When we hear things like BlackRock, we hear things like Franklin Templeton, you hear things like, you know, the DMV or all these things, we sort of throw our logic to the wind and say, oh, look, it's a lot of things coming, it's a lot of users, it's a lot of math, it's all these things that are coming, that's great, and we forget the reality of the world, right, and how things actually change and how things work in technology, right? If we flash forward again, take a look at this. This is another example, right? Flash forward 2 years ago, Salesforce said they're going to launch an NFT cloud, right? And this is like a perfect example of a top signal, right? Like if you look at Salesforce announce the NFT cloud, right, everything just dumps after that, right? And so sure, you know, we can look at today's headlines and say, BlackRock's bringing in a bunch of money, you know, Franklin is blah, 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 right? And it might happen. And look, I genuinely believe it will this time. And maybe it's because I've lost my mind as well. But like, I genuinely think it is happening. But I think we also have to look in the mirror and realize that generally speaking, the way technology changes and the way things work and move is not by relying on things like the DMV. Even just saying it out loud sounds stupid, right? Like we're hoping that the DMV is going to come save us, right? It's just a ridiculous thing to think, right? And so the truth, though, is, like, how does technology actually change? It's things like Uber. So I use this as an example of how things go. When you move from one technology paradigm to another, right, it isn't about carbon copying the same thing from one to the other, right? It's not like when the web came out, we just took the newspaper and put it on the web. Sure, I can read the New York Times on the web today. But the thing that actually is better for my reading experience is using things like social, things like Twitter, right? It's a new thing built in natively to the internet that you couldn't do before. Same thing with Uber as an example, right? When the mobile phone came out, sure, today I can access Xfinity on my phone. I can go to Bank of America and do all this nonsense on my phone. But the thing that actually drove users in the beginning, outside of the beer app and these types of things, right, was the idea that you could use something native, which is Uber, right? You could use things that are native to that technology, which is things like mobile, things like location, things like push notifications, right? And you designed a product that was focused and fit for that use case at the time to give you an experience that could not be done before. Right? And then, of course, over time, we carbon copy a bunch of the same shit on here, right? That's how this thing works, and that's how things actually change in technology, right? When you look at anything from sort of like, you know, old stuff to the web, from web to mobile, right? And when we go from, you know, where we are today to crypto, it's going to be the exact same thing, right? You have to build things in a crypto-native way, right, in order to make things actually work in that fashion. And if you look at the problem with RWAs today, right, the problem with RWAs is 99% of RWAs are just trad people coming in to do trad things on chain. And that's not a problem. It's actually not an issue. I don't say that pejoratively, even though it may sound like it, right? The problem is it's a sequencing issue, and it's a UX issue, it's a format issue, right? Biddle today, arguably one of the biggest RWA products out here, is a $500 million TVL product with 21 holders. So it's nothing, right? And if you look at volume, it's zero. No one trades this thing, right? The minimum to participate in this is $5 million, right? And you have to QP and do all this nonsense to get involved. It's a very difficult product to get a hold of. Ondo, same thing, right? Arguably one of the hottest projects in RWAs, right? 200 million TVL, 52 holders, no volume, right? That's the problem with this stuff today, is you're taking an existing product and putting it exactly on chain. Right, exact same thing on chain. And if you compare it to a crypto native version of this type of stuff, right, Maker, as a simple example, right, is over $5 billion in TVL, 100,000 holders. Right? If you look at Pendle, which is not even that big of a product, right? Pendle's $2 billion TVL and 40,000 holders, right? So you look at these types of things, you get a very clear sense that doing one thing in a crypto native way allows you to tap into a different market, different environment, different audience, rather than tapping into classic trad stuff, right? And it's a very simple idea when you understand why. At the end of the day, the crypto audience today is 99% degens and people that are crypto native, right? There's 1% trad people, and I think it's being pretty generous to the 1%, right? There's not that many of them there, right? And so it's coming, it is changing. But if you're building a product for that 1%, you're taking a tiny market and making it even smaller. So no wonder that nobody uses this stuff, right? So you have to build for the audience that's here and then begin to change and adapt over time. Right? And so what does it actually mean, right? In my opinion, there are two things. What are the sort of formats and unique aspects of being crypto native versus on-chain TradFi or RWAs? Number one is in the sort of, if you go back to Maker versus Biddle, right? The things that we all know, one is liquid, it's permissionless, it's composable, right? That's the sort of core feature and the core aspects of crypto. Right? Versus the other side, we do on-chain TradFi, it's actually it's the exact opposite, right? These things are usually illiquid, right? You're locking your money up for a long time. You've got to go through an incredible process to actually get access to things. You've got to KYC, it's gated up, it's QP'd, all this nonsense. And third, it's usually like very hard to use. You can't actually use this with anything else. It's not composable. Right? And so if you look at all these things today, right, like, you know, if I wanted to just replicate my bank but put it on chain, like we could just do that. But the problem is nobody uses that, and that's not what we want to do here, right? And we've seen with the stats and the proofs in the pudding, it does not work yet, and that's why RWAs in the current format are not going to work, right? Now, everyone always asks me, what is the RWA that's going to work, right? And what's the asset that's going to work? And I would say, look, you guys are getting the whole thing wrong. It's already here. It's arguably one of the best products in crypto today, right? It's a stablecoin. The stablecoin is an RWA. It's an asset that is backed by a US dollar, right? And if you can take a look at these two things, everyone always forgets that the stablecoin is an RWA, right? And it's because the stablecoin has transcended RWA branding, right? Because a stablecoin, at the end of the day, everyone thinks of stablecoin as just crypto. I don't even need to define it or make a distinction that it's an RWA because I buy and I use a stablecoin like I use anything else in crypto, right? I just buy it I just go to any DEX, I swap in and out of this thing, I can use it across for looping, I can do anything I want with it, right? I can send it to people. It's not something I need to think about in a different manner than crypto, right? So the word RWAs, by definition, is distinguishing it from all the features of crypto. And that's why the word RWA has to go to zero and has to die because it signifies all the things that are wrong with how we're doing things today in RWAs. And again, the proof's in the pudding. If you look at the stats here, it's very simple. The stablecoin is $180 billion in market cap. RWAs are 12. And if you look at the growth, that's not growth, right? The stablecoins are growing, right? And it's very clear. The stablecoin, right, started off solving problems for crypto natives. It was a DeFi product in the beginning, right? Using for that, it was a hedge, it was tighter trading pairs, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, after that, right, now you can bring other people on board, right, and people can hold the dollar. Right? Use case number 2, right? And that's bringing net new people in, right? Then use case number 3 is now we have institutions that are trying to do CBDCs and all kinds of stuff off the back and learning from the stablecoin as well, right? And so that's the idea here is we have to focus on the market that exists today, right? Build a use case, build volume, build momentum, and show what's happening, and that will allow other things to come in, versus say a bunch of words and expect and hope that Larry Fink comes in, drops a bunch of money into this, and saves the day, right? That's not what's going to happen. That's not going to work, right? And so by definition, we have to get away from this idea of using the word RWAs to talk about this, because there's no other world in which a bunch of things that are completely in separate categories will be grouped together, right? RWAs today means anything on chain that's related to the real world, which is collectibles, things like watches, cards, whiskey, wine, whatever. It means things like financial instruments, right? Equities, bonds. It also means things like houses, right? And alternative assets, right? There's nothing in the world, there's nowhere else where we group all those things together, right? So RWAs as a name and as a brand is a very obtuse way of describing things and a very poor way of categorizing. And things will evolve like the stablecoin. We just say the stablecoin. We don't have to say the stablecoin's an RWA. Right? Because you know what it is, it's descriptive on its own, and it's useful, and you can understand it by using it, not by having to describe it, right? And again, it goes to these 3 points. And so really, going back to it, it's not about RWAs, it's just on-chain assets. And we follow the path at Plume, right? What we believe that has been shown to us by the stablecoin, which is one, you got to build for crypto. You have to build for an audience that exists. You have to show usage, adoption, everything. And then, of course, after that, that brings people. And economics drive behavior. It's as simple as that, right? And so when you show people that it can be used, you show people how to make money here, you show people how it can be useful, then people will figure out what to do with it, right? Versus telling people, in theory, all this blockchain shit is going to be good for you, right? Showing people is the only way that it works, right? And so that's why we're building up Plume here, and it informs our strategy and our plan. We're building the #1 RWA ecosystem around here, and focused entirely on crypto natives at first, right? And maybe the very quick stat sheet on us to showcase how we're different. Again, look at BUIDL, look at these other things, look at the number of holders, look at the dollars, look at the uses, right? When you look at this slide, for us, for a simple example, we've got an ecosystem of 180 projects, right, which represents over $1 billion in assets on chain. From a TVL perspective, these numbers are a bit out of date now. I didn't update it this morning in time. We're over $400 million now, right? And then we've also built a real community, right? 21 holders for BUIDL. I've got a little bit under 4 million wallets on chain, right? Over 280 million transactions in the first 8 weeks of this, right? 500,000 followers on Twitter, right? So these are more crypto numbers. These are more aligned and in tune with how we expect things to perform in crypto versus this RWA nonsense, right? And that's how we build this thing, and that's what we're focused on. And the reason why we have to do this today is because RWAs need network density, right? You need to be able to bootstrap an ecosystem and have these things line up. Having liquidity is not the same thing for every type of use case, right? For example, Solana, right, is a great ecosystem, right? They've done very well. But the Solana community, the way I think about it, and the reason why Pump.fun works well there is because the Solana community tends to be, right, someone that apes, maybe like DCA's $5 into like a 100K market cap token, right? And that's why the sort of Pump.fun audience works well. You can copy Pump.fun into any ecosystem, right? But the reason why it works on Solana is because of the sort of community, liquidity, and protocol alignment, right? And they've done a great job with it. So it's not a knock at all, right? And if you look at Base, it tends to be more normie, which is why you have socials, right? And you have ETH and ARB, all these types of things out there, right? And so you have to focus on network density to bootstrap an ecosystem and to bring these things into focus. And you can see that, the market agrees with what we're doing here. We have a bunch of protocols saying, hey, we went to go talk to Base, right? And they realized that there was, they had a bunch of support from the team, they had a bunch of support from everybody, and they wanted to talk about this thing, and they realized that as they went out there, the unfortunate thing was that they got no new buyers, right? No net users, no new buyers on this thing, and they came to Plume, and we gave them a bunch of transactions, over 100,000, over nearly 400,000 transactions, a bunch of wallets, right? And connect them with LPs to get some real money in there, right? And same thing with asset managers. Asset managers also realize the same thing, which is like, look, I'm an asset manager. I don't know anything about crypto. I don't know about distribution. I don't know about protocols. I don't know about ecosystem composability. I don't know how to build here. I don't know any of that, right? So by providing a full stack ecosystem top to bottom that makes it easy to tokenize, distribute, make it composable, and find your users, we can actually onboard a bunch of these folks, right? And the only way they come to you is by having a network already, right? Because otherwise they would say, there's two choices. If I'm trying to decide where to go, I can go to one, an ecosystem with no usage, or one with real usage. It's not even a question, right? And so that's what we've done at Plume here. We built the #1 RWA ecosystem here. We've got a bunch of projects, a bunch of people in here, a bunch of liquidity, blah, blah, blah. So you can go check us out. And the idea is very simple. Plume should be the easiest place for anyone to both bring assets on chain, right? And then also utilize those RWAs, right? And we've seen a bunch of types of things here, right? Collectibles, alt assets, and financial instruments, of course, as I mentioned. But really, again, we're focused on crypto natives. And what are crypto natives? And this is the thing that I do think is important to talk about. RWAs for crypto natives means the simple things. Like, most people think about, oh, now I can buy access to XYZ or I can do ABC thing on chain. Again, if you have to explain what's going on, that means you've already failed, right? The way that we should be interacting with RWAs on chain is the way the stablecoin works today, which is you shouldn't have to think about it. It shouldn't be any different than how you do anything else on chain. And it's purely just happens to be backed by something else. And so you should be able to do all the same things that we do on chain today, which is yield farming, which is trading, which is speculating, all these things, but mixed in with RWAs as well, right? And we can talk a bit about these use cases, but broadly speaking, you should be able to very simply swap into a token, begin earning yield on real things in the real world. And get out anytime you want. You can loop on it, you do anything you want, right? We can do this today. We have a bunch of mineral fields on chain. We've got a bunch of solar farms. We've got a bunch of GPU farms, whatever you want, right? Swap into it, swap out, do what you got to do. Doesn't really matter. Trading, same thing, right? You should be able to trade cards, trade watches, trade wine, trade anything, right? And do that. And third is speculate. Right? You should also be able to do that, right? A lot of things in the real world, a lot of people think RWAs is tokenization, and you have to bring this thing on chain. You don't, right? One of our protocols lets you take out a 50x lev long on Pokemon cards, right? And the reason for that, right, and the way that works is not because we tokenize every card in the world, because you can pull a data feed, right? And bring this on chain, normalize it, make it useful, and allow people to bet on it, right? And the point there is synthetics are faster, it's more straightforward, right? It's a different format, a different way to engage with the asset as well, right? And so we bring everything there so it's the easiest place to interact with the real world on chain in whatever format and fashion you want. So we really want to expand the idea of RWAs and mimic what people are doing today, right? If you've got a deck screener today, right, every single major world event, there's a million tokens that get thrown up after, right? But they're all 5K liquidity, right? 50K market cap tokens that get rugged instantly, right? That's not a very good experience, but it does show you that people want to speculate and want to imagine what's going on in the real world, but on chain, right? And that's what we're doing, cleaning that up and making that use case easier. What do people do when things go down today? Right? When the market goes to hell, what do? They go into RWAs, they go into stablecoins, and they find a way to farm them. We're expanding the amount of things you can do, but just following user behaviors. That's all it is, right? And so that's what we want to do, is make it easy for people to interact and come onto Plume and build with RWAs and mix it with the real things. We've built a really strong community. We've been excited about it. And so, we've seen even like one of our community members got a tattoo of our logo on here. They changed the logo like 2 weeks after, so I felt bad about it. But it's what we have. But it is to say, like, we've built a strong community, and we've shown that there's a lot of demand and interest for this type of thing. And so we'd love to have everyone come in as well. We've built a bunch of stuff here. I won't belabor you with a bunch of this nonsense. My marketing team made me put it in here. But I will say thanks for stopping by and listening to me talk about RWAs today. We're always looking for folks to join Plume to help us build the future here, or even just talk about RWAs in general. There's a bunch of things that have not been explored here. If you go back to that first slide, right, the idea is very simple. Crypto is $2 to $3 trillion today. Each individual's asset class within RWAs is several orders of magnitude larger. All we got to do is bring a little bit of that in, and it works for everybody, and we all win. So again, thanks for the time. Appreciate it.